Recording in progress. to be able to work at an institution that puts on exhibitions like this and that welcomes in such a diverse and excited community into our space, which I should really say is your space. I also want to just give a shout out to all those people trapped on the internet. We wish you were here with us in person. And if you're online, I hope that you'll be able to come and see us in person at some point in time soon. Again, this place, the Africa Center at Aliko Dangote Hall, is your home. It's your place to celebrate our creativity, our ingenuity, our excellence as Africans and diaspora people. And States of Becoming is exactly that. It's the Africa Center's first multi-artist contemporary art exhibition since the renovation and opening of this space, which we very creatively call Space 2, because it was the second space that we built. The first space is on the other side where Tarenga, the restaurant is. So also come back on Saturday and Sunday and enjoy that food. But it's not the first exhibition. We've done a number of different exhibitions here at the Africa Center. We hosted in this space, African/American Making the Nation's Table, which was really about the influence of African and African-American food and food culture on American cooking culture as a whole. That exhibition, I think, is now traveling, as States of Becoming will as well. And we are very excited to really return to the mission and the history of this institution, which, as you know, comes out of the Museum of African Art, and focus on celebrating the artistic talent that comes out of the continent and our diaspora. So before I continue, I just want to thank our partners and our friends at Independent Curators International, who have partnered with us and trusted us to put this show up in this space. It's those kinds of collaborations that we really, really want to foster here at the Africa Center. Again, no more the sort of command, control, hyper-specialization, but really about coordination and collaboration with all people who share our values and our outlook. And we've been doing this for close to 4 years now. Again, I said this is not our first exhibition. It's also not our first arts exhibition. We've done a number of smaller contemporary art exhibitions with some really talented artists. Victor Ekbuk, Nigerian-American based down in Washington, D.C. Tenji Nkosi, South African-American down in Johannesburg. And then, of course, we had out on the plaza, Hank Willis Thomas's All Power to All People. We've hosted more than 200 programs, believe it or not, featuring conversations with leaders of African descent across numerous disciplines, music, literature, fashion, and of course, all the important current social issues that we're dealing with in the world, and especially on the continent and in the diaspora. So States of Becoming, well, I mean, I don't know, let's just a round of applause again. Like, what a show. Fitsum, you're going to be up here, so I'm not going to say too much except to say thank you, and thank you to all the artists, Helina as well, and all the artists here. Thank you so much. Folks will be on the panel, so you'll hear from them. I was told to actually keep it short and not introduce people, so I'm just going to keep going. This exhibition really, for us, is about African people and how people of African descent are constantly moving throughout the world. The challenges that we face and the opportunities that are unique to us based on the color of our skin. The assumptions that are made about who we are as Africans and diaspora people. And of course, about the strength of the cultural communities that we leave and that we also create where we go to. Migration, whether voluntary or involuntary, is a big thing for us here at the Africa Center. And that's not just because it's a topic, it's also because it's what we've lived. I mean, you know, I'm a Nigerian American, my parents came here, I was born here, and all the complexities that go into that identity forming, shaping, and realization of who you are. And that is seeded by that migratory experience. And it's allowed us to both influence and be influenced by the interactions we've had in the places that we find ourselves around the world. You know, what comes with that is that in that, whether voluntary or forced migration, we haven't always been able to share our own stories in our own ways. And it's also been a bit of a challenge to establish our own narratives of what it means to be people with individual and independent identities, which is so important. But of course, with the shared cultural roots in African countries and geographic roots in so many places around the world. So balancing all those different identities and the different aspects of who we are and who we want to be, and who we become based on where our journeys take us, is what our work at the Africa Center is about. And it's very much what this exhibition and what the conversation this exhibition sparks is about. And it's what the conversation that we're gonna have with our folks who are here, with the artists, with Yvonne, with Helina, with everyone, is about. And so I'm really excited to welcome all of y'all to the Africa Center, especially our artists. We have Fitsum Shebeshe, who's the curator, who will be in conversation with Helina, Metaferia, and Yvonne Osei, two of our wonderful artists. I know that you all have hopefully had a chance to move through the space, and if you haven't, you'll get a chance after the conversation. And that conversation is going to be moderated by Dr. Kimberli Grant, who is curator of modern and contemporary art at the Brooklyn Museum. And again, I want to say something. I want to say thank you to you for coming up here and say this is really about the way that we work in partnership with all the other institutions in the city, because we're all trying to tell similar stories, maybe from different angles, but it's that collaboration that's what makes, you know, this space really, really great. We're happy that you came all the way uptown to Harlem. Welcome. She was previously the McKinnon Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia, and has also worked as a Mellon Doctoral Fellow at the Newark Museum and Director of Exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora Art, or MOCADA, down in Brooklyn. She's curated numerous exhibitions and gallery installations, including most recently Black Orpheus, Jacob Lawrence, and the Mbari Club, which opened just last week. So you're doing all kinds of duties, uptown, downtown, all around town. So look, as you can tell, we're very informal here. We're about having fun. We're about sharing and exchange of ideas. We're about really inviting everybody into conversation and community with us. And it just warms my heart this evening to just see so many of you here to support our artists and the work they do and the conversations that they spark. So with that said, I will invite our folks to come up to the panel. Y'all can take your lovely seats. And I am so excited to hear y'all speak and discuss. And thank you to all of you for being here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am thrilled to be moderating this panel. I'm thrilled to be here at the Center of the Africa Center. I have seen this institution go through a lot of evolutions, and I'm just thrilled to be able to be a part of its latest. And so I'm going to introduce our panelists. Had to use my phone. I'm going to be brief in terms of the introductions. Their bios are very extensive and wonderful, and so I'm just going to be reducing that down, but please look on the website for much more extended bios because they're very impressive. So I'm going to begin with Fitsum Shebeshe, who is a curator and painter based in Baltimore in Washington, D.C. He is currently the gallery director at the Harmony Hall Regional Center in Fort Washington, Maryland. And before moving to the United States in 2016, was assistant curator at the National Museum of Ethiopia, and has participated in numerous shows throughout his illustrious career, and actually has his MFA in curatorial practice from the Maryland Institute College of Art. So, but please see his all his extensive shows and exhibitions. We have Helina Metaferia, who is an interdisciplinary artist working across collage, assemblage, video, performance, and social engagement. And you can see her works here in the show, of course. Her work interrogates the body's relationship to sites, especially as it relates to notions of identity and citizenship. Her group exhibitions and solo exhibitions are also very extensive. But she did have exhibitions including at MOAD in San Francisco, MoCA Detroit, Smack Mellon in Brooklyn, and numerous others across the globe. And she also has her MFA from Tufts University School of the Museum of Fine Arts and attended Skowhegan. And last but definitely not least, we have Yvonne Osei, who is a Ghanaian artist living in the United States. Her transnational practice explores the topics of beauty and colorism, the politics of clothing, and how global trade and colonialism impact post-colonial West African and Western cultures. She, again, like everyone on this panel, has a very extensive biography in terms of her exhibitions and career, but she's been a part of the Pentecost University Accra in Ghana, where she was a visiting scholar. She's done TED Talks in St. Louis, and was a fellow at was the 2016-17 Romare Bearden Graduate Minority Fellow at the St. Louis Art Museum. So again, I encourage everyone, both in person and on the website or in the Interverse, to please go and check out their biographies on the website. So I want to also say that we're going to definitely have time for questions in the evening, so please make sure you kind of get those going. But I want to really begin with Fitsum. I want to begin by asking you, how did you start to just conceptualize this show? You know, thinking about not only the concept of migration, movement, how that impacts a person's identity, their art practice, perhaps the perceptions of that art practice. So I'll leave that there. That's 6 questions in one.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kimberli, and good evening, everyone. So to give you a brief background of the conceptualization of states of becoming, it's more of based off of my experience in the US, moving from Ethiopia to here in 2016 to go to graduate school, and what I have encountered as part of resettling in America. And there are 3 aspects of my experience that have tremendously affected the way I view the world and the way I practice my curatorial work as well. So I have the 3 images I would like to quickly show you that maybe I can, talk about some a little bit, and that way I can go into more of the idea itself. So these are images that are low quality, but they have meanings and memories to me. So the 3 things that I have a challenge with in America was 1, the weather and the climate. I came from Ethiopia and I've never seen a snow in my life. I moved here in my late 20s, and I've never been outside of Ethiopia, of course, and I've been to a country in Africa, but being in America was, an excitement at the same time, and a question of an existential to me as a Black person that never left his country until really late, then encountering that there is actually harsh weather out there. Everything was gray, and and also like the area I used to live in, which is Baltimore, in some way had an impact on me geographically, like me being a Black and living in a predominantly Black community, and sometimes struggling to find my voice in the communities that looks like me was one of the greatest effects that has an implication on things that I have been doing. So if we go to the next slide. So the next one is about institutions. Sorry, I haven't asked my friends permission to put this up, but I hope you're so some of you are here and you will see yourself. So another really important aspect of my experience in the US is that the institutional experience I had here. I grew up in a very conservative Christian religion where some things are considered taboos to discuss among, among the family or in the community. So, coming here and sitting in this kind of, round table class, this is actually all my classmates. I was taking the picture, so that's why you don't see me here. But but some of, I think, the profound effect that being in institutions like this on me is that being, encountered by or being challenged by ideas in conversations that are discomforting and that were challenging to me. And sometimes, I was sweating because I was exposed to, like, conversations that people genuinely felt like it's important to discuss and genuinely felt like it's a culture of America to discuss how we feel, who we like, and what our desire is and everything. But these are things that are taboo where I came from. So it's been really a challenge for me to navigate myself in this kind of institutional culture. So if we go to the next picture, so sorry again, I couldn't find a better image. So I just, yeah.
You look
So,
great.
so this is me trying to navigate American museums and how they perceive, the continent I came from. I've had numerous misconceptions, thoughts about where I came from. Like when I say I'm from Africa, sometimes people tell me, oh, I've been to Ghana, but it's Ghana and Ethiopia are like really, yeah. And they ask me, I take it as a fun now, but early on, my time here, it was a little bit discomforting, and they will ask me, how did you get here? Yeah, it's a plane. You can just get, yeah, but I take it as a fun. But the thing is, as soon as I arrived here, I went to the museum in Baltimore, and that's the first time I get an impression of how a Western view Africa and African art and how they perceived it. So to me, it was a disappointment because it talks about the continent I came from, but it doesn't really represent me. And I went to other, institutions, thanks George and my classmates. We have had numerous travels across institutions particularly in the East Coast area. And I went to also another, you could take down the, yeah, 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 yeah. So I went to, and within a month, we went to Philadelphia, and I have also another profound, perspective in how, Black people or Black artists are being treated, because also, it's something that, I am also educating myself. Where I came from, we didn't have colonial history, and a lot of things I'm encountering here are like a first time for me. I know I was Black with my dear friend Sheena when we went to see an exhibition that was full of people that didn't look like me. We do have people in Ethiopia that don't look like me, but I've never, felt that I was actually different. So I went to like galleries, and all of a sudden, I felt like no one tried to remind me that I was Black, but that's like the feeling I got, and I couldn't, stay, and I left. And yeah, so but back to the museums in Philadelphia. So we went to see a couple of museums. We went to one museum first, and there was, of course, museum protocols and regulations as a visitor, and there's things and certain protocols we followed. So I am experiencing this for the first time. So we saw that, and we went to I believe, the PAFA, and there was still one of my favorites artists retrospective show, Norman Lewis show, and it was a retrospective. So when we get there, there was pretty much no protocols. You know, you can just, if you want to, you can lean on a work. I've seen people like pretty much touching the work, but on the other one, there was like marks and limitations, and like when you pass that, tape, someone will come in and say, "Oh, can you please go back?" Yeah. But we went to the other one, and there was something totally different. So that has profoundly, educated me that there is actually a difference. Norman Lewis was not like an artist, just a painter. He worked with, some of the famous art expressionists like the William de Kooning or people like that. But the idea is that because he doesn't fit that narration, and people like the art history gave him, a specific, boundary. So these are the three factors that have informed and affected the way I see things and I perceive myself. So I'm gonna leave it there, and hopefully come back.
Yes, we'll get more kind of deep in those questions, but I also want to pass along to the artists, and this is actually more just a group question, because I think a couple things that you brought up that I'd like to have all of you address a little bit is, you're thinking about the museum, and you're thinking about the institution of the museum and all its complications and all its issues. What does it mean to have this exhibition here at the Africa Center? What does it mean to have it now? And what is, for Helina, Yvonne, what does it mean to be a part of this exhibition? And again, thinking about as the specificity of the mission of the Africa Center, and I think especially in relationship to kind of larger institutions or institutions that have more broader missions. So I don't know who wants to.
I can jump in with that. First of all, thank you for curating my work into this exhibition, and to the Africa Center for having us, and ICI for all of your incredible curatorial care throughout the process. A lot of my work is institutional critique. So I'm really interrogating what space means, public space means, how art gets collected, who gets collected. And the work that I have in the show is from my Refiguring the Canon series, which very literally is about rethinking the canon of art history. And so I think it's a good, appropriate sort of entry point to the question that you're asking, because I'm always thinking about very similar, like, oftentimes there's work by people who don't look like many of us in this room, and they are esteemed in institutional spaces. And it's not really until the last maybe decade or so that artists of color, Black artists, really have a chance to show and exhibit our work to the degree that we have. And so it's not something to take for granted. There's a lot of people, generations of artists that have fought for this opportunity. And so now we have more opportunities in predominantly white institutional spaces and art spaces to show our work. But it's spaces like this, Africa Center, or spaces, like Studio Museum or MOAD, across the country that have preserved and have really prioritized our voices. And so I think that there's a very important role that the Africa Center plays in building this dialogue. And when I look at this space, I think of community. Ultimately, I live in Harlem, so this is my local institution, but also I feel very free here in a sense that I can have a deeper conversation about the work, a much more nitty-gritty conversation and nuances, and it's not overlooked. It's not taken for, I don't have to talk surface about the work.
All right. Well, it's great to be here. I feel like I'm home looking at all of you. Incredible thanks to Fitsum for the vision. I was saying that it's my first time actually showing with a group of African artists living in the United States. And that just goes to tell how important this exhibition is, to gather all of us and have one voice and have it be shown at the Africa Center. I'm particularly interested in this particular institution because it's not necessarily your typical art institution, right? And I think that that's what excites me is that it's these hybrid spaces of community that I respond to. The works I have in the exhibition of Between the Voids, which is the diptych video of me masking myself in black paint and white paint. It's haunting and telling at the same time because it still has relevance today, right? It's talking about race, it's talking about identity, and similar to the work where I'm clothing and unclothing nude female sculptures. I classify myself as a outsider artist making insider art, just because I felt, coming to the United States, I felt like I didn't have a place in Western institutions, museums in particular. So I took refuge in making work outdoors. And so a lot of my work is characterized by outside, outside spaces and audiences that may not be your typical museum audience. So I would say it's kind of a secondary read to a lot of my performances, bringing it into institutions and gallery spaces and whatnot.
Switch. Oh, no, this one works. Okay, great. Hey. So you both have alluded to it. And so let's go back to the question of, Fitsum, when you were curating the show, how were you thinking about the artists fitting together? What, you have the themes about, your migration story and thinking about these relationships to being in different spaces and perceptions of those spaces and how you're perceived and how you're navigating those spaces. But how are you also thinking the artists and the artwork is coming together? And then to the artist is a secondary question is when you guys were working together on, in terms of putting together the show, were there pieces in specific that you had thought that's in there, that's saying the message I needed to say? Or was it also a bit of a conversation, maybe a negotiation with the artist to go, I think I want that one, but then you start having conversations and you go, actually, I think that one makes more sense.
I'm going to start from the second question and go to the first. I don't want to forget the second. I think it's both when, for example, I saw Helina's work for the first time back in 2018. I was really struck because as I was a few months right after I finished my graduate studies, and my curatorial thesis was also focused on the same idea. And I was at the time focused only on the experience of two artists and how their experience affected their artwork, one being Gabriela Madi Mina and the second being Amara. But right after that, I've never met Helina, but we have some mutual friends, and she had a show in Washington, D.C., and I went to see that show, and I saw the Reconfiguring the Canon series, and I really felt like, that was my work, because that was like the immediate connection I made with that particular piece, because in some way also while I was in school, these were like an ideas I have why institutions have only, Picasso's work, on this side, but, this work here, why this artist was not getting recognition, and why is this? So I had already that questions, and when I see Helina's work challenging, the narration, I really felt like I was connected to that piece. Also, at the time, I didn't plan that we will ended up working today, but we kept on the conversation. With the first question, what was the first? I'm sorry, what was the first question?
So how did you kind of conceive of the artists that you're and
Oh,
thinking about how that you bring the artists together?
Yes. So with some of the artists, I've known them since I was in high school, and I've seen their growth. I have seen their transformations from 10 years ago to now, and even beyond 10 years ago. And when they move here, in some way, they also tell me their experience, like, their encounter around the language, if they are from non-English speaking countries. And although I did not even ask them, the artists I've encountered who had the same trajectory like myself, have almost a similar experience. So I found that connection, although I'm only focused on my experience as a curator, but there are artists out there who actually have their own unique story to tell and to bring to the exhibition. So that's why that's how I started looking at the experience of this, different artists in a way that can, work together and, fit the narration we are trying to tell.
Thank you. Helena, I want to get back to more specific in terms of the work. So in the film, Interrogating the Canon, I'm watching you move through this museum space in front of Rothko's, in front of Stella's. And I'm wondering, like, my first thought was, I was like, how did she get permission to do that? How did she do that? Because I think, number one, there was just the logistics of it. That's when you're just like, how did she do that? But from a conceptual standpoint, in terms of the work itself, why is it important to do it, a performative gesture? Why is it important to put your physical self in front of these works, move around them, have a relationship with them in the film?
Thank you for that question. So in my practice, in my total holistic practice, I work in collage, video, assemblage, performance. We either work with my body or the body of people from my community. And in this particular series, I felt like I could tell the story with my body as an artist, as an emerging artist, an artist who was born in DC of Ethiopian descent. And so I went to the National Gallery of Art to do an intervention in my, local federally run, paid for by Congress museum with its own set of politics. And then I had a residency at Mass Art Mass MoCA. And so I was able to work with Solowitz's collection there. And then the collage that I have on view is all Art News and Art Forum cutouts from the 1980s. So I was at the Bemis residency and got a whole bunch of access to all these different periodicals. And I chose the 80s because I was born in the 80s. I'm an 80s baby. And I was looking through to see who was a maker of that time that I could identify with. And there were very little women, if at all. Maybe two people, like there was a, who was in there? Who's like, Romy Burden, yeah. And yeah, Jacob, there you go. That was it, those are the two. Towards like 89, we're getting some like Faith Ringel, we're getting some Lorna Simpson, just towards the end. But that was it, and a whole decade. And so I was like, well, what if but what there was an interest in the primitive, right? MoMA had a show called The Modern and the Primitive. So there was this fascination with African art and how it influenced Picasso. So I thought about what if the primitive could speak, and what if it could be embodied, and what if it wasn't genderless and nameless and faceless? And what if it was my body and I could perform that? So I could perform that on paper through collage. I could perform that in space. And so these interventions, were really a call and response between that, who's appropriating whom, essentially, and what culture is appropriating which. And so the logistics and the practicalities is permission from the estates. That's kind of how it goes. And a curator who wants you to do the work. And so Terrence Washington was at National Gallery of Art at the time, and he made it happen. The security didn't know about it, and they always tried to intervene, but he was around in his office, and he cleared that.
Nice, good to know. So Yvonne, I want to talk to you about your film, one of the films in the exhibition, and you talk about, the performance of you looking at the viewer. You have your face painted in black, you have your face painted in white, and you are kind of very actively, viscerally, like scratching into your face, marking your face, I should say. And so and you also talk about the idea of the color black and the color white as these voids. And so I'm wondering if you could really speak more about why you consider them voids, why you feel like it's the best way for you to actually discuss these bigger issues in relation to the color and how people are perceived through those colors, and why the performance of the make marking within it, in terms of just the physicality of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's important to see it in context to when I moved to the United States. I moved from Ghana here in 2009. And so I created that work, I believe in 2012, which is 3 years from moving. And it was in a way my initial understanding of being Black. You know, it was almost as though when I crossed the Atlantic Ocean, I lost being this Ashanti woman or being this, Ghanaian, and the complexities of identity back at home. And it almost flattened to this color of being Black, and how physical that identity seemed, right? And so I decided to embody not only the color white, and not only the color Black, but also the color white. And in a way, peeling away or, scratching into them is an ode to my own culture and most West African cultures of scarification, and how that is a way of identifying one. But I'm really also thinking about, is Black really attainable and is white really attainable? And in a way, using the language of abstraction to talk about the complexities of race. And if we've built this system that is hard to conform one person to, I always find it interesting that the work was shot in a controlled setting, a controlled lighting, but you can absolutely tell that my color, the skin, my complexion changes in one, in one environment versus the other. I become literally darker in the one where I'm covering my face in white than the one where I'm covering my face in Black. So really it was about that. And it's interesting to look at it now and to see that we haven't come that far.
Yeah, I mean, I think the formal aspects of both of your work is really beautiful. I mean, I think in terms of both, the way in which you're interrogating how we're using kind of formal colors, lines, in other people's work and in your own work to really think about these larger social conventions and conversations. I want to think now a little bit about, for all of you, what are we hoping what are you hoping the artists kind of take away? I'm sorry, not the artists, the audiences take away. In terms of the work, in terms of what you're putting out there, that in terms of how you put this show together and the themes that you're trying to present through the work. So maybe we start with the exhibition as a whole, and then asking you guys to really think about within your own practice, as this is just a representative taste of your overall practices.
Yeah, so the exhibition aims, a few things. One of them being, although this is, our experience, or the experience of African diaspora, I believe that there is always that connection we all have with a certain culture. For example, if you move to Ethiopia, you may have to go through the same experience we have here. It might be different, but if there is always a movement, and there's always, a cultural, experience that comes, with that movement. So having, us telling our experience in some way, helps, us to also not question, but, consider, our own relationship with other cultures. So that's one thing I believe that the audience might take from this section. And the next aim is that of course, it goes back to what Helina was saying earlier. Um, Also, I have always a fume with the way you know, Africa is generally represented in terms of like the practice. So there's always, an image of Africa, and maybe now is changing. I haven't been back to that museums that I have my first, experience of what, an African art is, but there's that idea of like African doing the same artwork, all the way from, the beginning to this day. But in this exhibition, I would like for the audience to take that, although these artists are here and they lived here for a certain amount of time, but they still have that African culture and history that we can read from the artwork itself. So I believe that in some way, the works can tell about, Africa and Africa at the moment, not Africa we know from, the exhibitions we've seen in the past. So those are the two aims that I believe the audience can take from this exhibition.
Well, for me, it's really about taking up space. I think that a lot of times Africa can be a bit bashful when we're taking up space, and I think that it's important, and this exhibition is testament to that it's important that we fill spaces and take up space and speak for ourselves. There's a video that shows on the screen. It's titled "Africa Clothe Me Bare." The one I'm showing here was made in Paris, and it's really about interrogating the Western canon and this idea of history being something that I cannot rely on, right? Because you can't tell, it's always in a perspective. And I think what this exhibition is doing is broadening those perspectives and bringing in new perspectives for consideration. And so for me, Western history, it should be interrogated, right? And new voices should be brought into to speak. And it's really about taking up space.
I'll just quickly add, because you guys spoke so eloquently about this. As a first generation Ethiopian American, I think about placemaking, and I think that that's something that runs through all of everyone is thinking about identity from a particular perspective and a particular lens. And I'm thinking about that could apply to your racial or ancestral lineage. It could also apply to your artistic lineage. And so my work has been a quest to sort of make sense of my position as an artist and the roots in which my art is informed by, which oftentimes is Ethiopian art and African art, in addition to the art I've been educated in, which is like the Western canon. And so I think that search for a sense of self and asserting a sense of self is a through line for this show. For me, it's my takeaway is that we've found a way when there wasn't a clear way to become an American, to also become an artist or creative, or to become, and so that kind of interrogation lends itself to throughout the show.
How are we doing on time? Okay. Does that mean like I've got 5? Okay, 10 minutes. So I want to also just ask you guys to talk a bit about what's coming up next. I mean, we have this show now. Hope this show's going to travel, which is great, because I definitely agree with you that so many other cities also need to see this. I think, being in New York, in my opinion, there's already assumption. We know this is important. Like it's not even a question. But I think what I hope is that this exhibition also really travels far of the country where audiences really want to see this as well, need to see this, absorb it. But beyond where the exhibition itself goes, what other projects do you have going on? What's also happening? What are other, moments we can let people know, like, hey, I got this happening, I got that happening, because this is the start. We've got this exhibition here. It's going to move the artists, all you guys' artists' career, both in the audience, on the stage. Your careers are going to continue to move. So give us just a bit of a taste of what else is coming up that people can expect or can anticipate.
Well, me personally, I'm planning on spending more time working on the exhibition, and in a certain way that can include the practical and analytical framing of the idea, and how these artists are navigating their new space, not only from the experience point of view, but also in a way that's can be contributing to the discourse, the ongoing discourse around the African diaspora, or like writings that can be useful in the educational levels of the African studies and African American studies, and in studies like anthropologies and areas like that. So I really want to spend more time in doing more research and prepare writing, not just because this is now we got the experience part, and this is how our experience is, but this exhibition is not only the experience of the diaspora. There is beyond the experience. So I want to work on that part, in that part I believe would be helpful to the discourse. In my personal curatorial, I run a gallery, so I have a few shows lined up, so that are separate from this, but those are going to be more of my own personal, shows that I work with artists I like and artists I feel comfortable working with. So those are, what's coming up.
So yeah, I'm really excited about several institutional shows that are coming up and currently taking place nationally and internationally. I'm going to be in my first biennial, the Sharjah Biennial, which I'm really excited about, in February. So I'm making new work for that. And then some great museum shows. There's going to be upcoming museum show at the First Museum connected to the Tennessee Triennial in Nashville, which is 50 Black collage artists, believe it or not, that's going to be touring. So really excited about that, but just happy that the work is being shown. And I do enjoy showing an institutional context because I'm working so much with critique of institutions that I think that it lends itself to being in that sort of environment and having that discourse within the belly of the beast itself. So.
Super. Well, my solo exhibition opened a month ago at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, titled Brainchild, and it's thank you. It's a personal one. It marks a time when I was pregnant with my first child. I have a 2-month-old waiting for me in Chicago, but it's basically using my pregnant body to symbolize how we all have potential as Black people, and making pilgrimages to specific areas in the United States. So I visit Money, Mississippi. I go to Emmett Till's graveyard. I visit Lorraine Motel, where Martin Luther King was killed. Very specific areas, and I bring those experiences back into the museum space for further contemplation and to hold space for those stories. So I have that. I'm also preparing for a trip to Seychelles to dissect colonial history there. It's a series of work called Who Discovers the Discoverer? And I'm again questioning history, and really it's interesting because in Ghana we were so the educational system, we were so forced to really emphasize colonial history. I was learning about when the Dutch came in and when the Brits came in. You literally have to learn the dates as well. And not really much about the leaders that were pushing back against colonialism, and they were exiled to Seychelles. And so I'm really, we'll be going to Seychelles to dissect that history.
Amazing. Before we get into questions, we only have a couple minutes left, but I would love it if the other artists in the show, again, we've had a great conversation with two of the artists in the show, but I know that there's more artists who are here, and I'd love it if they would just stand up and stand up and like acknowledge themselves, because this is an incredible project, an incredible show. And so though they are not on the stage with us, please, if you haven't met any of them, chat with them, talk about their work, talk more with our artists here, talk more with Fitsum, who is also an artist. And so I just think it's important for us to recognize that we have an incredible group show talking about some amazing and important dialogues that are ongoing, that are evolving, and that are shifting, hopefully how we think about the states of being as humans. So I'm going to open this up for some questions. I don't know if hopefully people are monitoring the interweb. And so please, if you're watching this on the internet, please also put some questions out there, whether or not it's in the chat, so that way we can get someone to ask those questions. So do we have anyone, or do I need to come up with another one? Yeah. Oh, do we have? Okay, great. We have a person with a microphone. Great.
Hi. I'm excited to be here, but I'm a little bit disappointed, not in the show, but in the space. I went to the Dakar Biennial this year, and what was amazing about it is the spaces in which you found the art. It's very dynamic. Some of them were very challenging, but it made you interact with the art. What I'm disappointed about this space is what we're replicating a white box, and this is the Africa Center. Why are we replicating the same thing that that we're supposedly questioning? Why aren't the walls yellow? Why aren't the walls blue? Why aren't the walls green? Where is Africa in this space? Love the art. Thank you for the show.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that question.
Maybe I should just comment. I'm back behind you, and I actually really appreciate your comments. For those who, I was here earlier, Uzan, the CEO, and I think the criticism is actually it's really important for us to hear. But I also think that one of the ways to think about where Africa is in the space is it's us in this space. And so it's about the conversation of who we are as artists with that concept from before. And it's something that we think about quite a bit. If you think about, again, sort of how museums were constructed and the purpose that they were constructed for, to sort of engender a certain kind of behavior. What happens when you subvert that behavior? Maybe keep the structure, but then have our brilliant artists in conversation with that structure in a particular way. What I found really interesting yesterday was when everyone was here to celebrate the opening, sort of like for the artists and a few of their guests. This place turned into a nightclub. Right, so it might have looked like the white walls, but there was that African spirit, that diaspora spirit of behaving and celebrating in a certain way. And I think it's important to think about that in conjunction with your point and your criticism as well, that we do have to think about how the spaces itself are constructed, and more importantly, how we move through the spaces. But I'll leave it to the artist. I think I'd love to hear from them about how they feel about that and that sort of that juxtaposition. Not to put y'all on the spot.
Oh.
Like that.
No, I think it's a valid question, and it's one that I've battled with, not necessarily with this space, but with institutions in general, and if my work belongs there or not. And I think that I take a lot of, because again, my understanding of art growing up in Ghana was really about, you would experience art during festivities, right? It was really an embodiment. It was an extension of oneself. It was the chair you were sitting on, or the umbrella that was being held, or, art was not viewed on a wall. You were literally walking, living, and breathing in art. And so it's also hard to really, I think that the foundation of contemporary African art is being birthed in the Western art canon. So it's hard to detach yourself from a system that you are a part of. It was interesting to hear a lot of the artists during dinner talking about this. Like, can we really separate ourselves from this? One of the quotes that came to mind when you were speaking was, it's Nelson Mandela's, really, and it was talking about if you talk to a man in another language, you talk to his head. But when you talk to him in his own language, you talk to the heart. A lot of the issues with Africa are Western issues. And so I have found pride in showing in these spaces and speaking Western language because I'm addressing a Western problem. And I take refuge in that, but I'm not going to stop creating work authentically in public space and engage in viewers that are outside these walls. But it's okay for me to also show work in museums and in gallery spaces. I think those two avenues are important for furthering the work of cleaning up a lot of the mess that has happened in our world. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add.
Can I just say one quick thing as someone who doesn't work here? But I will say as a curator, I think what also could be said is that rooms can be changed, maybe not the structure, but to your point, the colors, the design, the layout, those all can come together to create a different type of experience for both the artists' work in the show and for the audiences coming to the show. So I think, this is an opportunity where, experimentation could happen. And, again, not just from how it looks, but then how we utilize it, how you experience it. So I'll just put that there.
Just to add on, I also think it's a valid question. And Uzo has, answered most of the logistical challenge the space has. But for me also as a curator, I really believe that, the space has provided us all the necessary resources we needed. All the walls were built for this show purposely. Of course, there was another show before this, and the Africa Center was probably the most, effective, exhibition collaborator I have personally worked so far. They were really involved, not only from the logistical point of view, but also, giving us the platform and the resources we needed. When it comes to the, the layout, of course, there is another way of making the works feel Africa, or, changing the walls, with the colors that can, create the atmosphere of, the Africa we know. At the same time, this exhibition is, happening for the first time, and it's not like a finished exhibition. It's a process. It's an unfolding process we are working on. So the next venue, it might be a different, it might look a different exhibition. So it's not an exhibition that's, finished. It's still unfolding. It's an experience we are, still, unpacking. So I see it that way, and in fact, I really, I'm grateful to the Africa Center for spending a lot of money, a lot of money, I'm rare, to build up the wall. Also, in some way, also the program I went to at MICA and Maryland Institute College of Art, we have the director sitting here also, the director and the founder and the first director. So the idea of my academic course was to create a space for an exhibition. This space may not be purposely built for an exhibition. It would look different, and it will have a different, walls if that was purposely built, but we make it work for our purpose. So I see that, as a, as an unfolding process at the same time as an achievement. So of course, it's a valid question. Maybe for next show, we can definitely consider about the walls.
Yes, any more questions? I see a gentleman, one, and then we'll get to you, sir.
Hi. Hi. I have a question, but I also wanted to quickly say something about the space thing. I remember, I think it was in 2019, Gabby, the South African curator, said something about being asked about the space she ran and why it was painted black, if it was in reaction to, like in opposition to the white cube idea. She said, no, it never even occurred to her. I think sometimes we give something more life by continuously reacting to it. Sometimes we just have to be and exist in our own spaces and to help with whatever it was. And that's how we kind of create our own knowledge base. That said, considering that in the conversation around the relationship between an African and diaspora is in two parts. One, in the part of the land where you arrive, and two, in the part of the land where you leave from. Are there any plans whatsoever for this show to, I don't know, travel to the African continent? Are there plans to collaborate with institutions there? Because at the end of the day, there are two types of audience who see it here. The audience who are already familiar with here, who have gone through the struggle or going through the struggle, or white audience who are the predominant people within these communities. But the African who is planning on locating or traveling is not going to see it until he or she has been hit with the realities that are discussed in the work. So are there plans to actually have this work travel to the African continent through a couple of institutions or not?
As of right now, there is an ongoing conversation. There is an interest from a gallery in Zimbabwe, and hopefully also we will be able to take it to Ethiopia as well, where I am from. But with this magnitude of exhibition, there is also a challenge. That's shipping and logistic. And if we really love to take the show to Africa, but we really need a support, to help pay the shipping and insurance and everything. But there is an interest from both here and, Africa, and there are galleries that are interested in hosting the show. So hopefully in the later years, we'll be able to raise the money we need, and hopefully we'll, bring the show to Africa.
So if there's any funders in the room, we got a project for you. Oh, sorry, the gentleman had one question before and then I'll. Oh, okay. Oh.
And I was thinking about the show. I was thinking about the show, and there's so many layers to the show. And I was thinking on the concept of state becoming. And my question for the artists, because there's levels of becoming here from the physical space, the artist, the individual artwork. And I wanted to know, because I keep playing on that word states of becoming. We got Africans, we got African Americans, we got all this coming together like a river. So my question for you, and I'm gonna get to that. I wanted to know, when you heard of the state of becoming, what did that mean for each individual artist? What do you feel that means? Because I think it means, in my opinion, I think it's maybe different from the curator, from the artist. And I just want to get into the mind of the artist and find out what were your, your original concept and thinking about the states of becoming?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that the play on the United States is obvious there. I think about citizenship a lot in my work, like notions of citizenship and what it means to belong to a land and who gets to determine that belonging, whether that's like an oath that you take to become a naturalized citizen or a birthright, like you happen to be born in this land, and the struggle to become a citizen. I think as somebody who comes from two immigrants and an immigrant family, I think about that a lot, and it informs my work because I am constantly negotiating and navigating between duality, as many of us are, and some of that being transnational identity, and some of that being hyphenated in many ways, whether it's Ethiopian American or artist hyphen professor hyphen human, like navigating roles and hats, friend, sister, daughter, all of these different things. And and then the becoming is the it's the ongoing, right? Like, so you're always re-identifying and you're always rethinking oneself. So I think it's a very poetic title, which I take no credit for. I think this is the curator's. But I think it did. I don't think you told me the title until maybe much later. But when you expressed what you wanted from the show, I think we were in harmony with the work.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I like your reference to river and to a water body and the flowy nature of that. And even to think of the seas that separate Africa and the United States. I was also thinking of it in terms of relocation, but a little bit further than that is the mental and the psychological state of becoming. Like, who determines that? Do you determine it, or is someone putting you in that state? And I've always, in a way, when I came to the United States, I was thinking about validity. Who validates you, right? And there's also power in knowing that you validate yourself. And so this state of becoming is giving yourself the permission to take on all these different identities and all these different experiences that you are. And the shifting and the changing of identity is also interesting. And what you choose to embody in a space that you are in is also interesting. I really love your use of river because it's really about that flowy nature of becoming.
Before we go, I just want to, I'm checking on time. How are we doing? Are we 5 minutes? Okay. Sir, are you gonna not have a question now, or? Okay, then I'll get, yeah. So we'll get the last two questions.
Boom, boom. Hello. Hi.
Hi.
So my question was, I was walking through the gallery and I was observing the impact that the work was having on me. And so I'm curious as to what your artistic practice, this exhibit is new, but like, what has your artistic practice done for your immediate community or your families? Because when we talk about migration and immigration and all those things, I come from an immigrant family. And so I'm always in observation of what the work I do does to my family, specifically my parents, siblings. So I was just curious about what that, have you observed any of that? Have you been able to track that? What's it been like?
I do paintings, and my family likes what I do. Also, they were happy later on in my practice, but at first they were resistant. But with my curating, I doubt they have a very good understanding of what I do, and sometimes they really think that I'm wasting my time. And they, advise me, are you sure you want to do this? And are you so there is that hesitation, and there is that always, assumptions that, back home, you are probably, you probably have more credential if you are a doctor or, like a lawyer, engineer, yeah. So they're fine with the painting part, but unfortunately I'm no longer painting a lot like I used to. But for the curating, they were like, okay, he's doing whatever he wanna do, and we don't, we don't mind his business. And I think that's the perception. But they trust me that you know, I know what I do. So, but that's how my family thinks about me.
Yeah, I integrate my family a lot in my work. I integrate them like in terms of their practice, and their lives, their biographies into my work. My 11-year-old niece just performed with me for her very first performance in March for my solo exhibition. It was amazing. And it was a surprise to my whole family. I flew them to Boston for the show. I didn't tell them that she was going to perform. So art has become so much of a lifestyle for me. And between traveling and just working a lot, it's a way for me to bring in my loved ones. But it's also a way, because so much of my story it comes from the people around me. And so there's like this kind of engagement between friends and family and loved ones that starts to come into the work. And I try not to make it sentimental, but it's always there too. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's always been, again, an extension of myself into different communities. I'm excited when my work is engaging people that I don't know at all. And so I, again, make work in public space. And so the people that I engage with are constantly changing. And similar to Helina, I also incorporate family members in my work. The words, the titling of my pieces. I was talking about referencing my pregnant body, using that as symbolism to talk about the potential that one has in the community around a person. When someone is murdered, you're not only killing the person, you're killing the entire system around this person. So it is really about community. Not only my family, but all these different passers-by and the conversations that the work triggers and how they also pass that on to the people that they meet.
Last question?
I'm gonna sit down. So, so I happen to know the curator and have been, I had firsthand experiences with some of his discomfort here. And I can remember the first time he talked, our class was at the BMA and we went to the African art section. He was livid. He said, this is not a good representation of what African art is about. Like, don't they know about contemporary art? And there were a couple of pieces further down. And so I know from just my own understanding of his work that was one of the things that he wanted to do. He wanted to introduce to the world, or whoever would be willing to experience it, that there is contemporary African art, right? And so I think that's very exciting he did that, right? And the second thing he wanted to talk about was his experience as an artist who came to the States to study, and what happened as a result of, the culture of the United States. And so the theme of this exhibition focuses on 3 journeys, right? And so he assigned each of you a journey. And I would like to know, first, Fitsum would have to tell us where he thinks their journey lies. But I would like to know if you could share places where you think your work speaks to his vision of your journey.
Thank you. Also, Sheena has been a great friend of me for a very long time, and also my editor. And I do quickly want to mention, so on a title, it's a really wonderful title, but I would like to take 50% of the credit because I'm terrible, with titles, and I have a list of titles. I gave it to the ICI team, and ICI has a wonderful group of people. And they must, with something that is like this, and they say, "What do you think?" And it sounded great to me. So I just want to be, make sure that I don't take the whole credit. Then on Sheena's question, so I see Helina, also we came from the same country. Helina and Helina's work as a bridge between an African diaspora and an African, American community and African American artist. So it's relevant that, she's an African American. She's, she was born here, but also she has that history and culture of, African heritage. So I see her connecting, these two groups and creating a new platform for us to become more close. In Yvonne's work, I see. It's loosely categorized, but it can go either way. But for Yvonne, I see her work fitting that artists who are constantly referring to their African culture and elements and bring here to educate their communities they currently, lives in, and also at the same time use their culture as a way of, adopting the community and getting to know the community, or in a way that's maybe surviving is not, the right word, but it's a way of, it's a tool that, helps the artist, adopt their new environment. So that's where I see Yvonne's work.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm still going back to the image, Fitsum, of the winter and just how brutal, it was. I moved in August of 2009. So I had a bit of summer, and then there's that deep dive into fall, and then it just went on to winter. So there's just something really isolating about the color of snow, as well as the kind of the feeling of it as well. But yeah, my mind is going in so many different spaces. I also had when I got here, one of the things that I prioritized was to teach the community. So I became a GED teacher because I felt that was one of the easiest ways to know the community a little bit deeper. And that's when I was told who I was, right? Did you, one of the questions was, do Ghanaians, well, one of the questions was, do Ghanaians actually have planes? And I said, well, no, we actually don't. The pilot swung from a tree. And and so you could really see the biases. And this was 2009. We've come a long way. My mind is racing with things that are maybe a little bit more appropriate that I should, speak on. It was tons and tons of information, but what that did was it gave me an understanding of who a Black woman is and what a Black woman represents. And because American culture, the identity is so physical, I use myself as an archetype in a lot of my works. So when I am maneuvering in space, I know that I am a Black woman, and so I can use that as power instead of undermining what a Black woman is and what a Black woman is expected to do. And I find a lot of fulfillment in I am material for my work. My body represents a specific thing for a specific reason and a specific purpose. And so I magnify that to make statements and to subvert that sort of colonial lens that's forcefully placed on us.
And I'll just quickly, to wrap this up, echo what Fitsum had said about my experience and being an Ethiopian American. I've only been to Ethiopia 4 times, right? So I'm a foreigner when I am there in many ways. But then as I travel, especially internationally, my face reads Ethiopian. So it's this weird, like, and I'm like, I have an American passport and I have an American accent and anyway, so it's just weird, like, I think we, with the mobility and globalization and the diaspora being what it is, identity has become so complicated. My work oftentimes integrates diasporic histories, including histories in the US, histories within the African continent. And I think that having an other lens in so many regards allows me the fluidity to come in and out of identity without attachment. But that's kind of been my personalized experience. But I'm very grateful to be included in this show. I don't know how many versions there are in the show, but yeah, it's a perspective.
Well, on that note, I want to thank my panelists. I would like to thank all of you for coming this evening. The very just first program for States of Becoming, make sure that you check out the other programs that are going to be happening for the show. I'm going to pass it over if we have any closing remarks. But thank you so much for coming tonight and have a good rest of your weekend.
So no real closing remarks except to say thank you to all of you for what a wonderful discussion. And again, for the artwork and the curation. We're honored to be able to host. And thank you to all of you for the questions, the comments, the criticisms, all really important in terms of how we think of how we become as an institution. So nothing more to say except there's a whole exhibition for you to enjoy, to move through, to experience, and to become yourself. Thank you very, very much.